Is Russia using satellites to spy on the West, right from Africa's backyard? The West says so, but the truth is very different. Africa is getting satellites from Russia. And with that, the West African countries have total surveillance control over their borders, something the West never managed to achieve. But the West says it's the start of a new Cold War, with Africa as the battleground. Is it? Let's find out. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso decided to partner with Russia for satellite technology. But why satellites and why now? The surface-level explanation is clear. These countries need better surveillance and communications to combat insurgencies and manage vast, sparsely populated areas. Islamist militants have been wreaking havoc across the Sahel, and the inability to control borders has made the situation worse. But there's a deeper question lurking here. Why did these countries turn to Russia, a nation so far removed from West Africa's history and geopolitics? Here's why. Western promises have failed them. For decades, the West has imposed its model of governance, security, and development on Africa, often offering nothing but rhetoric and restrictions. Instead of addressing the real security concerns of the region, Western powers have focused on political correctness, human rights workshops, and endless dialogues. Meanwhile, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso burned, with insurgents thriving in the chaos. It's important to understand the context of Western failure in this region. Despite years of military aid and intervention from Western countries, particularly France, these West African nations have only seen the insurgent threat grow. This is the harsh reality that people don't talk about enough. While the West provided resources, they often ignored the actual needs of these nations, offering short-term fixes rather than long-term solutions. In contrast, Russia is offering a clear, tangible advantage: satellite technology that can monitor borders, track insurgent movements, and manage internal communications securely. For military-led governments whose primary focus is security and national control, this deal makes perfect sense. Satellites aren't just for tracking militants. They're also critical tools for communications, agriculture, and infrastructure development. Access to this kind of technology will revolutionize the ability of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso to govern themselves more efficiently and independently. With these satellites, these countries will have the ability to bypass Western-controlled communications infrastructure entirely, something that was never possible before. This move also shows that these African nations are tired of being treated like passive recipients of aid. They want autonomy, they want respect, and they want to be in control of their destinies. This satellite deal is just one more step in the broader strategy of breaking away from Western influence. And it's not just about combating insurgents. These satellites will also be used to monitor the environment, track climate change, and manage natural disasters like floods and droughts, issues that have long been exacerbated by the West's neglect of Africa's needs. The technology can support better planning for agriculture, water management, and even urbanization, all of which will contribute to long-term stability. But why Russia? Couldn't these nations have turned to China or another emerging power? Russia didn't just stumble into Africa overnight. This was a carefully crafted strategy, built over years of cultivating relationships with African leaders and capitalizing on Western missteps. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia stepped back from the African stage. But as tensions with the West grew in the 2010s, especially after the annexation of Crimea in 2014, Russia saw an opportunity to reassert itself on the global stage. Africa, with its vast resources and strategic importance, was the perfect place to start. Russia has been working tirelessly to position itself as the alternative to Western influence. They've made no secret of their ambition to challenge the West's dominance in global affairs, and Africa is the battleground where they can do this without directly confronting NATO. So, how did Russia convince these military governments to align with them? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now.
Now let's look at what Russia is up to. Moscow has been ostracized by much of the world, but it's not isolated. On the contrary, it is making new friends and strengthening existing partnerships. Let's take the example of West Africa. of 3 countries in the Sahel. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. These 3 countries are run by military juntas, and the juntas have chosen to cut ties with their traditional Western partners.
One critical component of Russia's growing influence in West Africa is the presence of the Wagner Group, a private military company with close ties to the Kremlin. The West loves to portray Wagner as a group of mercenaries wreaking havoc wherever they go, but here's the truth: they're getting results. While Western forces have been bogged down by rules of engagement and endless bureaucratic red tape, Wagner has been on the front lines, helping to push back insurgents in ways that Western forces never could. For these military juntas, Wagner's success made Russia a natural partner. Unlike the West, which imposes conditions on every bit of aid, Russia offers tangible military assistance without moralizing. Wagner's role has gone beyond just fighting insurgents. They've become a key part of the strategy to keep these governments in power.
No. The Wagner presence in countries like the Central African Republic and Burkina Faso and Mali has been primarily about regime security. Okay, by that I mean protecting the governments in power that are not necessarily.
At the core of the Russia-Africa relationship is a shared vision of sovereignty and resistance to Western hegemony. These military governments don't want to be lectured about human rights, elections, and democracy. They want to solve their immediate problems, and Russia offers that without judgment. Russia, for its part, sees Africa as a critical piece of its global strategy. With each new partnership, Russia expands its geopolitical influence, securing access to resources, military bases, and diplomatic leverage. Also, Russia's growing presence in Africa has coincided with the West's declining credibility on the continent. After France's disastrous interventions in Mali and other parts of West Africa, which many local populations saw as neo-colonialism dressed up as counterinsurgency, Russia entered the scene at just the right moment. By offering military hardware and now satellite technology, Russia filled the power vacuum left by the retreating Western forces. By aligning with Russia, these countries are sending a clear message. They are tired of Western interference, and they are ready to embrace a new world order where they have more control over their destinies. But is this satellite deal the start of a new Cold War? To understand the full implications of this deal, you have to look at it in the context of a much larger geopolitical game. Africa is no stranger to being used as a pawn in global conflicts. During the Cold War, the continent was carved up and exploited by both the US and the Soviet Union, with devastating consequences. Now, with this satellite deal, we could be witnessing the start of a new Cold War, one where Russia and the West are fighting not just for resources, but for influence over the future of the African continent. For years, the West has been losing ground in Africa, both economically and politically. China has already cemented itself as Africa's largest trading partner, and now Russia is making inroads into the continent's military and technological sectors. The West, meanwhile, has clung to an outdated playbook, focusing on aid and development programs that do little to address the immediate needs of African nations. The satellite deal is a perfect example of how out of touch the West has become. While the US and Europe continue to push for governance reforms and human rights improvements, Russia is offering solutions to real, on-the-ground problems like security and infrastructure. The satellite deal will give these nations an edge in the fight against Islamist insurgents, something the West has been unable to deliver after years of military intervention. This isn't just about technology, it's about control. The satellites will give Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso the ability to monitor their borders, gather intelligence, and maintain secure communications without relying on Western infrastructure. This could be the start of a broader shift, where more African nations turn to Russia for technology and military support, further eroding Western influence in the region. The implications go beyond the borders of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. This satellite deal signals that the balance of power in Africa is changing rapidly. As Russia deepens its presence in Africa, it is effectively building a new sphere of influence, one that directly challenges the traditional dominance of Western powers in the region. The West, particularly former colonial powers like France, is already feeling the pressure. Their inability to maintain stability in the Sahel has left a vacuum, and Russia has wasted no time in filling it. But here's where things get interesting. The US and Europe are increasingly wary of Russia's ambitions, and it's not far-fetched to imagine that they may respond by trying to reassert their control over African nations. This could lead to proxy conflicts, much like what happened during the original Cold War, where African nations were caught in the crossfire of great power struggles. For the West, Africa represents a critical strategic frontier. Losing influence here could mean losing access to valuable resources and crucial trade routes. As Russia consolidates its power in the region, the West may feel compelled to push back, either through diplomatic pressure or more direct military involvement. But as of now, it's clear that Russia has the upper hand, offering solutions that the West has consistently failed to provide. While much of the conversation around this satellite deal focuses on geopolitical strategy, it's important to remember that there are real, tangible benefits for the people living in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. So, what tangible changes can they expect to see? These satellites aren't just about border security or military operations. They have the potential to radically improve life for ordinary citizens across these countries. For years, much of the Sahel region has been left behind when it comes to infrastructure development. Rural areas in particular have been disconnected from the rest of the world, with little access to reliable communications networks, internet services, or even television and radio. This has had a profound impact on education, healthcare, and economic opportunities in these regions. With these new satellites, that could all change. By providing reliable communications infrastructure, these satellites will allow people in remote areas to connect with the outside world. Students will be able to access online educational resources. Farmers can get real-time information about weather and crop conditions, and healthcare workers can coordinate more effectively, especially in regions that have been difficult to reach. In essence, this technology will bridge the digital divide that has left millions of people in the Sahel isolated from the benefits of globalization. It's a major step toward leveling the playing field for rural communities that have long been neglected. The security benefits of these satellites cannot be overstated. For years, insurgents have been able to exploit the porous borders of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, moving freely between countries and launching attacks on civilians and military targets alike. The inability to monitor these borders has been one of the main reasons why the insurgency has been so difficult to contain. With real-time satellite surveillance, these countries will finally be able to track insurgent movements more effectively. This means quicker responses to threats, better coordination between military forces, and, ultimately, a safer environment for civilians. For people living in areas plagued by violence, this technology could mean the difference between life and death. In addition to the security and connectivity benefits, these satellites will also play a crucial role in monitoring environmental conditions. The Sahel is one of the most climate-vulnerable regions in the world, with frequent droughts, floods, and wildfires. These natural disasters have a devastating impact on agriculture, which is the backbone of the region's economy. The satellites will provide real-time data on weather patterns, soil conditions, and water resources, allowing governments to plan more effectively for both short-term and long-term environmental challenges. Farmers will be able to make better decisions about when to plant and harvest crops, and governments will be able to respond more quickly to natural disasters, potentially saving thousands of lives in the process. Perhaps the most profound impact of this satellite deal, however, is the sense of empowerment it provides. For too long, African nations have had to rely on Western powers for critical infrastructure, including communications and security. This dependency has often come with strings attached. Western aid is frequently tied to political conditions that undermine the sovereignty of African governments. By turning to Russia for satellite technology, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are taking control of their futures. They are no longer beholden to Western interests, and they are no longer dependent on Western aid. This deal represents a significant step toward true sovereignty for these nations, giving them the tools they need to govern themselves more effectively. But while these benefits are clear, they don't come without a cost. So, what does Russia stand to gain from all of this? One of the most obvious motivations for Russia's growing presence in Africa is access to the continent's vast natural resources. The Sahel region is home to significant deposits of valuable minerals, including gold, uranium, and oil. Russia has a long history of leveraging its relationships with African governments to gain access to these resources, and this satellite deal is no exception. By securing a technological and military partnership with these countries, Russia is positioning itself to gain preferential access to these resources in the future. This is not just about satellite technology. It's about building long-term economic and political ties that will benefit Russia for decades to come. In addition to natural resources, Russia is also seeking to expand its military influence in Africa. The Wagner Group, which has played a key role in providing security for these military governments, is just one part of a larger strategy to establish a Russian military presence on the continent. By providing military hardware and satellite technology, Russia is securing its foothold in a region that has historically been dominated by Western powers. This military influence gives Russia a strategic advantage on the global stage. With a presence in West Africa, Russia can project power into the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, and even the Gulf of Guinea. This is part of Russia's broader ambition to challenge the US and NATO on multiple fronts, and Africa is a key battleground in this new global power struggle. At its core, Russia's involvement in Africa is about challenging Western hegemony. For decades, the US and Europe have dominated global affairs, often at the expense of smaller nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. But as Russia reasserts itself on the world stage, it is seeking to create a new world order, one where Western powers no longer call the shots. By aligning itself with African nations that have been marginalized by the West, Russia is building a coalition of countries that are willing to stand up to Western influence. This is not just about military and economic power, it's about ideology. Russia is positioning itself as the defender of national sovereignty, offering an alternative to the Western model of governance and development. For Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, this partnership with Russia is a way to break free from the shackles of Western dependency. For Russia, it's a way to expand its influence and build a global alliance of nations that are ready to challenge the status quo. To sum this up, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso's satellite deal with Russia is about much more than technology. It's about sovereignty, power, and the reshaping of global alliances. For these African nations, this deal represents a break from the failed promises of the West and a step toward greater autonomy. For Russia, it's a strategic victory that expands its influence and secures its position as a global power. And for the rest of the world, it's a wake-up call. Africa is no longer waiting for the West to solve its problems. It's forging its path, and the consequences will be felt for years to come. So, with Russia now controlling the satellite systems in West Africa, how long before the West is completely edged out of the region? Let us know in the comments section. Now that these African nations have turned to Russia for military and technological support, is there any chance the West can regain their trust, or is it too late? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.